We acknowledge the lands, waterways, and sky country across our horizons.
From the lands of the Dharug, Dharawal and the Gadigal, the Sunrise people in the east.
The Morning Whale Keepers of the south, to the desert sands of the Ananu and Arunta.
The Kuki-Yalanji, Yirinji of the tropics to the Gulf country of the Wanyi.
The Miriam of the Torres Straits.
The Gumach, from the Yulmu lands to the escarpments of the Bardi peoples.
South to the Palawa, and west
to the Sunset people, the Noongar.
Paying our deep respects to all our custodians, elders,
and tomorrow's knowledge holders.
Nugambi, everybody. Nugambi means welcome or hello in Dharawal language. Good evening, and my name is Maxine Ryan, and I'm from the Aboriginal community of Botany Bay, and I belong to the Dharawal Nation, but I am going to acknowledge Bidjigal Gadjigal clan, the land we're meeting on, and acknowledge my elders, past, present, and those emerging, and then the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people that are joining us. I welcome you here tonight. And when I do welcome, I do love to acknowledge my elders, because where we are today, we're still here, we're still surviving. We are the oldest culture in the world. We're over 60,000 years old. And that's why I acknowledge my elders, because the hard work they done. They fought very hard to get where we are today, for our employment, for our freedom. As I did grow up on a mission, so I can travel around Australia. I'm free. I don't have to get permission like my parents used to have to get permission. Because when it was employment, my dad had to get permission to work. And then when he was allowed to work, he had to wear his tag, walk to work. He got a job at St Michael's Golf Club. And he'd walk to work, sign on and off the mission, and then come back and sign back on and leave his tag there. Because back then, if Aboriginal people didn't have that tag or that paperwork, that's part of our stolen generation stories. And today, my elders, that's what they fought hard for. And my culture is still living on. And I'm passionate about going into schools and teaching the young generation about my culture and how to look after this beautiful country, because it is a beautiful country. And our young generation, they're our future. They will be running my country one day. And we are all their role models. So we need to keep on doing the good work that we do. And I thank you for doing all that good work you do. Because, as I say, we are their role models. They won't forget us. They won't forget our face, that smile, the nurture we gave them. They will remember us because we are all their role models. And that's what it's all about, and helping our young generation. And when they do, they will take their journey on this land. Aboriginal land always was, always will be. I teach them about that word respect, to carry that word respect with them. Because every year we welcome those different cultures into Australia. And every school I go into, they are multicultural schools. And I love going in there because I love listening to their stories. I love teaching my story. And I teach them that word respect, because every year we welcome those different cultures into Australia. And I have done a few of those ceremonies. And while I'm there, some of the parents or grandparents will come up and they'll say to me, "Oh, thank you, Auntie Maxine, you did welcome me into Australia. Now you're here at the school teaching my grandchildren, my children. It's their generation that we're teaching." And I say to them, you're welcome, doll, because we can live together, all together as one, as Australia is a multicultural country. And we can keep on doing the work that we do, is looking after mum. That's our mother. She's the one that feeds us. She feeds our plants, our animals. She makes our medicine. And I teach the children, if we don't look after the land, who's going to look after us? And not just the land, the water too. As I say, I did grow up on a mission out La Perouse, and we care for the water. And that water is precious to us too, because we survived from the water and we survived from the land, because we got our rations, but we always had food. And at the moment, the whales are there, the buri-buris. They're my totem. And that's why I care for the water, because that's their land. That's how they survive. We have our land to survive, they have their land to survive. And not too long ago, we was at the cemetery and we was laying Auntie to rest. But a whale came in Botany Bay and had a baby. And to us that was beautiful, because we lost one, but we gained one. And we don't lose our people. We don't say goodbye to them. We say Nandawabi in my language. And, because we will see them in the dream time. And I know when I go, I will see my parents, my siblings, and everybody else that I met along the way in the dream time. And that's what I teach the children. Because if they have their beliefs, they have their culture. And I tell them to please cherish it. And don't forget your culture. And I tell my family, because it's very multicultural. We got Irish, we got Chinese. My young son just married a lovely young girl from Italy. Nunas are still alive. They took my granddaughter over there. They can't speak English. But I always say, please, let her keep FaceTiming her grandparents and let her learn the language, because she does have two cultures. And, they migrated here in the 60s and they love Australia. And I'm so happy that they love my culture, my son. Because when I first heard, and she said, yeah, we're from Queensland, I went, oh, did you tell your parents we're Aboriginal straight away? It doesn't matter that my children are old. I still care for them. She said, no, it's all right. My parents are not like that. Because because she said her dad worked in the jail up there. I said, well, he won't be popular, I tell you. And she said, no. But, I said, them Murrays up there, they're more wilder than us Kooris down here. But, it's so beautiful that my granddaughter can grow up with them two cultures. And that's what I say to her. Thank you for bringing my granddaughter into this world, because she is beautiful. And, and that's what I teach the children. We're all beautiful. Our cultures are all beautiful. And keep them together. And keep your gods together. Wherever they go, if they go to church on the weekend and everything. Because the children, they have great stories. They have the best stories. And when they talk about their culture, they talk about it in their way. And they're funny sometimes, but I don't laugh at them. I tell them it's beautiful. I forget their names, but I always call them, yes, chap, yeah, chappy, beautiful, yes, gorgeous. And, they say, what do you call us that? I say, because I'm old and I forget names. And they start laughing. Then they all got to ask how old I am. So, but, that's about respect. And that's about growing up and nurturing our young generation. And, living together as one. And as I say, they're going to take lots of journeys the way we did, And no matter where they work, they will work with someone with a different culture, who speaks a different language, who wears different clothes, eats different food. So that's what it's all about. It's all about respecting each other, who is next to you. So on that note, I'm not going to say goodbye to yous. I'm going to say Nundawabi to yous. Because if I don't see you around, I will see you in the dream time. So you have a good evening, and don't forget, look after country, and country will look after you. Have a good evening. Thank you.
Welcome everyone. I'm Mel Fernandez. I am the GM of Policy, Communications and Research at CEW, and it's so fantastic to be here with you this evening. Thank you so much, Auntie Maxine. You always provide such warmth and humour to start our events, and we really appreciate you sharing your truth, your stories with us, and that powerful call and reminder about the strength and the survival of our First Nations peoples and role modelling for our young people. I'd also like to acknowledge the ongoing connection our First Nations communities have to land, water and country, and I particularly want to acknowledge the strength of our First Nation women leaders and the privilege that we have as CEW members in the community to draw on that strength and from the CEW First Nation members in our community. So on behalf of CEW, I'd like to welcome you here this evening for the launch of our 9th annual CEW Census. It's always such a privilege to come together with CEW members and partners, and I'd really like to especially welcome and thank some of our special guests here tonight. Most of you probably know that we're entering our we have entered our 40th anniversary year this year. We're celebrating 40 years of Chief Executive Women. And so I'd particularly like to acknowledge the founders, these true trailblazers that forged a path for CEW and for women leaders and that changed the game so that we could have the conversation that we're having here today. And particularly Heather Lebruin, who is one of our founders who is here with us today. To our panellists, Dr. Cody, who is the Sex Discrimination Commissioner, to Lucy Steed, who is the CEO of Melior Investment Management, and to Samantha Marks, who is the Managing Director at Spencer Stuart, to our CEW President, Helen Conway, and our CEW CEO, Lisa Annese. And I also wanted to acknowledge the work of our Policy and Engagement Committee, some of whom are here tonight, who really lead the census work and the production of this report. So particularly to our chair, Tony Brendish, who unfortunately couldn't join us today, and Cheryl Heyman, who are the two members who have led this project, and to our other PEC members who are here with us tonight. So Carol Austin, Lynn Lewis-Smith, and Lisa Clays, who are here. I also want to acknowledge every CEW member that's in the room. The members are the lifeblood of this organisation, and the impact of our work would not be possible without all of your dedication and the leadership that you show in your communities. I want to recognise the incredible support of our CEW census partners, particularly ANZ, our thought leadership partner, and also our partners that work with us on the production of the census report. So Spencer Stuart, and particularly CEW member Kerry Burgess, who leads that work with us, to 4040 Vision, to Hester, to Open Director, and to Melior Investment Management. Without you all and your tireless work, this report would not be possible. And to Telstra, who are our very generous hosts this evening, and I've been informed that we're christening this space, so it's a very exciting time to be in such a fabulous area, particularly to Vicky Brady, who is one of our CEW members, and Yannicka Takto, who is also a recent CEW member, for hosting us and your generous support this evening. But I think also a special note that Telstra is one of those shining lights in the census of one of the few organisations that has a female CEO, and also one that is firmly committed to flexibility and inclusion at a time when we're seeing questioning in this space. So I do have a little bit of housekeeping, if you'll bear with me. The toilets are up the back, up the stairs on your right that you would have passed. Your emergency exits are up the back and down the front. And if there is an emergency and the fire alarm sounds, there will be Telstra representatives that will guide you to where you need to go. So today we welcome the 9th annual CEW Senior Executive Census, and this research really provides a critical benchmark in measuring senior leadership, women's senior leadership in our top public companies. But for those of you who've been with us through some of the years of the census, you'll know that it's increasingly becoming a sobering read. And this year we have to face up to the stark reality that when we look at women's leadership in our top companies, progress is stalling and in some cases going backwards. When we look at the top 200 public companies, progress has crawled from 21% to just 32%. So we're moving at a pace that is basically standing still. While we've seen more women leaders emerge across politics, sport, culture, when it comes to corporate leadership in Australia, we're lagging behind. So tonight we're going to hear from an incredible lineup of cross-sectoral leaders who are going to unpack the census findings, dive into what the data tells us, but also why gender equality is not just a social issue, but an economic imperative for the future of our nation. So it's my great pleasure to introduce our new CEW President, Helen Conway. We've been thrilled to have Helen appointed. Helen is an experienced leader, director and lawyer who has worked across commercial, public and not-for-profit sectors. She has extensive board experience in health, transport, energy, housing and homelessness, domestic and family violence, education and financial services. She's a true champion of women's rights, was previously the judicial head of the New South Wales Equal Opportunity Tribunal, established the Australian Workplace Gender Equality Agency, and was the previous president of the YWCA Australia. So Helen is going to dig into this year's results and call us to action. Thank you, Helen.
Thanks very much, Mel. It's an absolute pleasure to be here tonight. I really always enjoy meeting other members of CEW, and it's lovely to see so many of you here tonight. So, as you know, the results are in. So the 2025 CEW census of the top 300 ASX companies are in. And as Mel has said, pretty disappointing. At a high level, they show that a quarter of the companies went backwards. So that's a quarter, that's a lot. It's hard to understand why a quarter would go backwards in their representation of women in this age. And of course, 18 companies have no women executives at all. So I don't know what their problem is. They seem to be half blind. So these are very sobering statistics. And I'll give you a few more just to depress you just a little further. So we only have 10% of CEOs who are women. Only 31% of executive roles are held by women in these companies. 41% of these companies have no women in the traditional CEO pipeline. And 80% of those pipeline roles are held by men. So as Mel has said, it's pretty clear that our role as women in leadership is stalling, and we need urgent action to arrest this. Now, I shouldn't be completely depressing. There are some good stories in the census. There are some organisations, some companies doing very well. And I do think it's important we acknowledge that those companies have committed to gender equality, gender balance in their leadership teams, and they are achieving good progress. But notwithstanding these good results for some, the census suggests to me that we have a serious accountability problem. It would seem some companies are treating gender equality at best as a matter of form, and perhaps at worst, discretionary. Look, it may also be that others simply are overwhelmed by a range of other priorities. We know it's a pretty congested space for companies these days. And I think they may well have lost sight of the benefits of gender equality in workplaces. But it doesn't matter what the reason is. Whatever the reason is, it's time to get back on track. So when the census was started about 9 years ago, it was thought that the power of the data would actually make change. It was thought that evidence of that nature would be enough. Well, unfortunately, that hasn't happened, so we need to take a different approach. Generally speaking, when companies set objectives, it doesn't matter whether they're objectives around revenue or, safety or whatever. If those objectives aren't being met, management and boards take action. They do something to intervene. But it doesn't seem that this happens when gender equality lags. So why is that? We know there's a very simple formula around achieving business objectives. So what's the missing piece in relation to gender equality? It's clearly accountability. I don't know that people recognise this, but we know that if you put in place the proper accountable mechanisms, they work, and it's urgent that companies start to address this issue. It's interesting, we see these double standards and people don't call it out, Gender equality should be treated like any other business objective, but people don't see it as such. So we know that those companies that set gender targets are 2.7 times more likely to achieve gender balance. The formula works. We know it works. Companies just need to commit to implementing these targets. It's very interesting, when you look at the census, only 44% of the ASX 300 companies have implemented targets. And then if you look at a smaller subset, if you look at the ASX 100, it's 59% who have implemented targets. So it's no surprise, of course, then that the ASX 100 companies significantly outperform their smaller peers when it comes to women in leadership positions. And frankly, we only need to look at the public sector and look at some areas of our political life where we see targets have been extraordinarily effective in achieving good balance in leadership positions. Now we know, and I think it's been alluded to earlier, that there is a bit of a pushback at the moment around diversity initiatives. Now we know that's most particularly in the US, not so much here, although we do see a bit of it here. But we also see this problem about slowing progress, so we do have a problem. The thing that caused me concern in the last few weeks is to see some pretty disturbing comments from leading organisations. These are big Australian organisations talking about reverting to work practices that are truly inimical to women. So this is not acceptable in this country. Australia has an opportunity to lead rather than backtrack like some other countries that we see. What corporate Australia does just doesn't shape balance sheets. It shapes our culture and it shapes our values. We need to decide what sort of nation we want to be. There are many arguments in favour of gender equality. We know we can repeat them ad nauseam. These arguments are well supported by research. The economic case is clear, and of course there are good supporting arguments around constructive workplace cultures and fairness. We just don't need any more studies. We've had enough of the studies, we just need action. And it's amazing to me that people don't see the value of women at a time when there are such productivity challenges and skill shortages in Australia. We have an extraordinary female talent pool, which by global standards is highly educated. I think people just overlook the value, the different perspective that women leaders bring to decision making. This helps drive innovation, it helps drive growth, and frankly, it's a strategic advantage which some people don't seem to recognise. It's clear that publishing data doesn't move the dial sufficiently. So the corporate sector does need to step up. Most particularly, organisations need to set these targets. They need to set gender balanced targets. They need to tie these targets to executive remuneration, and they need to report progress against the targets transparently. But of course, targets aren't enough. You need to have the infrastructure in your company that will enable you to achieve those targets. So this means things like investing in gender-balanced CEO and executive pipelines, challenging the traditional pathways we see to leadership positions, and building inclusive, flexible and respectful workplaces. The fact is that gender equality is core business. It's not a nice to have, and it needs to be treated as core business. So after 9 years, CEW knows what works, what doesn't work. Companies have a clear choice. They have a clear choice to embrace gender equality as an opportunity and garner the broad value that that brings. When I became president, I committed CEW to be more ambitious, more active, and more inclusive. And I'm inviting every one of our more than 1,400 members to join me in being more active on this issue. And that includes everyone in this room who may not be a member of CEW. We all have a choice. We can use our positions, our networks, our work environments to advocate for accountability that will drive change. We have a great opportunity in Australia to drive a better corporate environment. We should seize this opportunity and prosecute the case with energy and urgency. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Helen. I think it's always a challenging job delivering the depressing news of the census, but Helen managed to do that, I think, leaving us with a smile, with a bit of humour, but also with a really clear call to action and a powerful call to action, that accountability is the missing piece, and that we have a choice to make, that there is a moment for corporate Australia right now, and that companies, but also us as individuals, have a clear choice to make and a clear course for action. So now, to explore what shape that action might take, I'm really delighted to introduce our esteemed panel. These incredible women are all members of CEW and we bring really extensive experience from different sectors and perspectives and lived experience. They will unpack the CEW census findings, but also what they've seen work and what are those calls to action for different sectors. We'll welcome Dr. Cody, who was appointed Australia's Sex Discrimination Commissioner in September 2023, who brings extensive experience as an academic and discrimination lawyer. Prior to her appointment, she served as Dean of the School of Law and Professor at Western Sydney University, where she championed diversity and justice initiatives. Throughout her career, she has been a dedicated human rights advocate, representing Australia's interests at United Nations Human Rights Committees. And Anna has recently delivered the really powerful and important Speaking from Experience report, which I encourage you all to read. And I'll give a little plug that she's delivering a National Press Club address on the 24th of September. So if anyone is not already registered, please do, because that will be a very powerful address. Next, we have our fearless leader, our CEW CEO, Annese, who joined CEW as our CEO in January of this year and brings extensive leadership experience in gender equality initiatives. Previously the CEO of Diversity Council of Australia for 10 years, she led groundbreaking research on workplace diversity, inclusion and gender equality. Lisa serves on several influential boards and councils, and she was recognised as the AFR in the AFR 100 Women of Influence in 2018. Lucy Steed is the founding CEO of Melior Investment Management and chair of the Melior Advisory Council. A pioneer in equities impact investing, Lucy co-founded Melior in 2018 to deliver competitive returns alongside positive social impact. Lucy has been recognised in the Australia's top 100 Green Power Players list in 2023. And to host this conversation, Samantha Mark, who leads the Spencer Stuart Australian Office and Human Resources practice while serving on the Global Financial Services practice. She advises boards and CEOs on team capabilities with expertise in succession, assessments, and leadership development. With over 30 years in financial and professional services, she previously led the Leadership Advisory Services in Asia Pacific. Welcome to our panel.
Well, thank you, Mel. Fantastic opening welcome, and great to be here. I'm absolutely delighted and a little bit in awe of the company we have on the panel. Deep experts in gender issues, the law, advocacy, and economics. So I'm actually originally a bean counter. I started as a chartered accountant and an actuary, but I like counting. And I was counting the number of years that we've had. It's been 9 years since Spencer Stuart actually, I think, has been helping to support the census. And I think many of you, I'm sure, have in your past career gone to that old adage of what gets measured is what gets done. But somehow, maybe every year we look at this and it looks like glacial change. I think we've seen that comment a couple of times in a row now. And so on one hand, some of us may say, well, we haven't, or have we achieved? What have we achieved? And in some ways, I think without the measurement, perhaps it could have been worse. I mean, we've seen, Helen, you made some comments that some organisations have gone backwards because what we're trying to do here is difficult. I think all of us face that every day. I thought just in preparation, some of my perspectives, and I think you said I've got over 30 years experience, so perhaps a little bit of an offshore perspective as well as perhaps from different industries. 9 years ago, actually, I was still in Singapore, and in Singapore I had been with DBS Bank for over 13 years, where actually more than 50% of the management team were female, and they have just appointed their first group CEO, who I actually had the privilege of recruiting into DBS in 2010. So it took 15 years, talk about pipeline planning. But very proud to have been part of that process and the change. It was a massive culture change that took place there. Fast forward to when I've come back to Australia, which was actually in 2017. I actually, to be honest, felt that I'd gone backwards in time. And in some ways, you know, a lot of the comments that are reflected in the census in corporate Australia do sort of, in some perspectives, put us behind some countries. But I think the question is today, with some of the pushback and some of the fantastic progress we've actually seen, I mean, who was to think over the last 9 years, since that time, some of the biggest companies, the biggest brands are now led by women. Whether we look at Leah Weckhardt at Coles, Telstra, where we've got Vicky Brady, Meg O'Neill at Woodside, Woolworths, Qantas, Ramsay, and the RBA, all led by women. Who would have thought? And so we've proven in Australia that we have the muscle to do this. And then I'll take it really personal. When I came back to Spencer Stuart here in Australia, I did a little quick census calculation this morning because I like numbers. Actually, 29% of the partnership were female. 5 years later, today, 80% of our partners are female. And in fact, some may suggest it's a reverse gender issue, but who would dare? Asian representation at Spencer Stuart, and I'm just going to touch on the intersectional topic for a moment, was 8%. Today it's 19%. And our declared LGBTI has tripled from 2% to 6%. So in some ways, you know, there's some comments perhaps it's harder for smaller organisations. But is it? Is it really? And so I guess what I was just touching on some of these points, because I think we have the muscles here in Australia. We can do this. So what's stopping us? And I think Helen's given us some really great thoughts for us to really consider around accountability. And I'm hoping that next year, when it's the 10th anniversary of the census, that maybe we can be sitting here having a very different conversation, perhaps, but doesn't mean we have to do something different, because the definition of insanity is to keep doing the same thing and expecting a different outcome. And so with that, I'm going to throw to our panel. Those are sort of my reflections on the read of the census this year, having really spent time on it for many years in a row. I might ask each of you to just comment briefly on your thoughts and what were your takes, maybe starting with Lisa, since you know it best.
Thank you. It's lovely to be here with all of you on beautiful Gadigal land. I mean, I won't rehash the statistics that Helen has taken us through, and I'm sure you may have read the report already, or at least observed the stats up in the beautiful lobby area. But what I would say is I think what is important to always reflect on is why. Why is it so important that power is shared around boardrooms, around executive teams, in places where decisions are made? And I think the answer is twofold. I mean, look, we're CEW, we're interested in ensuring that the ambitions of talented, meritorious women who want it, that they're not encumbered by barriers that men don't have to face. And so that's important for individual women to realise their full potential. And we're strong advocates for that. But it has a broader purpose. What we know is that when you have gender equality in leadership teams, you change the culture of organisations, which impacts the lives of every employee. If you zoom out and look at that across the economy, it means that people are working in organisations where they're more likely to have better well-being, be a bit safer, be a bit more flexible, be able to have more meaningful work that contributes to all the things that are important to human beings. This research is, I'm not making this up, if you look at the research done by the Global Institute of Women's Leadership, especially around governments and politics, when power is shared, you get better political policy, you get fewer wars, you get people hold on to peace treaties easier. This is something the UN have known for a long time when they're giving out aid, how to distribute that and the important role that women play in taking care of the herd. So I think that it matters, because if we want to be the best version of Australia that we want to be, then we need to tap into all the available talent. We know that talent resides across every population group on a normative curve, and that there's enough ambition across every population group that there is no excuse for us to have the results that we have. And we know that it means something for everyone who works in an ASX organisation and beyond. The impact that that has on the economy, on the labour market, and on communities more broadly, because of the decisions that are made when power is shared. So I think we need to continue to prosecute the case for why this matters. And I know that we love talking about the business case, and there's a lot of reports that we've cited in the census around how it relates to productivity and to product and to profit. But it's big. It's bigger than even all of that. And so I'm not ashamed to say that this is a goal worth striving for, and that it's one of many goals around gender equality. But having women sharing power and being represented in leadership and making decisions that affect other people's lives is critical to the lives of every Australian citizen.
Thank you. Anna, your thoughts?
Fantastic. Lisa, what a great way to get us started, and perhaps thinking about why it matters. And I really loved Auntie Maxine's framing of for our children and for our future, and that real focus on what are we leaving behind. I thought that was a really beautiful way to think about why it matters. Absolutely, in terms of why it matters, it is about the quality of the decision making, the diversity of the decision making across the whole organisation. So it's it's both the CEO position, but then it's also all those executive leadership positions, which are so significant. We know that so many people work in corporate sector, how important it is for shaping our society within Australia. So we need that diversity of thought, of approach, reflected across our organisations. The couple of stats that really impacted on me were that 41% of companies have no women in CEO pipeline roles. That's a lot. And then also that it's the slowness of the process. So we've gone from 5% to 10% in 8 years. So if we then calculate, and maybe I'll rely on your good numbers skill.
Now in human capital.
It's how many years it's going to take us to get to 40 or 50%.
Yeah.
It's ridiculously slow.
Yeah.
So, and in the meantime, as Lisa's pointing out, we're not using that merit, we're not using that talent, we're not using that innovative, different ways of looking at the world and contributing. So those were some of the things that struck me.
Thank you.
Fantastic comments, and I think we're all connected on the why, and we're all wondering about the how. And I think that stat that Helen quoted, the 2.7 times, is how much more likely you are to achieve your gender balanced teams if you have a 40-40-20 target, is encouraging. It's about the only encouraging thing in the whole report, is that we actually do have a technique that is successful in this. And I've been sort of advocating this space with listed companies, and our investment team has for 6 years, and we see it all the time. And it was interesting, last week we were speaking to a listed healthcare company who we started talking about having 40-40 gender targets for their ELT 5 years ago, and they said to us, we want to do it, but we don't want targets. They're like quotas, they're really bad. Like, we don't want to do that. We want to do it organically. And so we caught up with them last week and said, how are you going on that? And they're like, oh, it's really hard. We haven't achieved it. So targets work. And I think that's what is another positive, because I'm reaching for the positives, is that unlike the US, we actually have policy settings that are starting to become more gender friendly. And I think that the amendments to the Gender Equality Act that happened at the start of this year, which will now make it compulsory for any company with over 500 employees to have gender equality targets. They'll have to pick 3 out of the WGEA 17 that are available, and they will have to show their progress over the next 3 years. This is brilliant. This has taken away that I'd like to do it organically. This is happening. And what's even more exciting about the how and the backing of this Gender Equality Act and mandatory requirement is that they're also talking consequences. So they're saying, if we don't see progress of those 3 targets you picked over those 3 years, we may not let you tender for a Commonwealth contract, connecting it to the value and to the revenue. Brilliant. This is what we need. So I do despair about the numbers, and there is a whole lot of work across the industry that we all need to do, but I am encouraged that we are starting to see settings that are going to be more positive for gender equality going forward.
And given a lot of, we're looking at systemic change that we're looking at when we look at the census levels. Given the legislative frameworks and the work that you do in this space, what do you see as a way to leverage some of that to change the game?
So one of the areas of work that we've been involved in at the Human Rights Commission is around the positive duty, which is a responsibility on all employers, organisations to prevent, eliminate as far as possible sex discrimination, sexual harassment. And it picks up nicely the point you're making around accountability, but also clear guidance. And I think that WGEA does have those really clear targets that each corporation will have to follow, and that's something that you can see in the positive duty also, that there are 7 clear guidelines that each employer has to follow with particular approaches to doing so. And it does provide that very measurable way of deciding whether or not you're going to achieve improved representation in the executive leadership and CEO level. When gradual change hasn't eventuated, as it clearly hasn't here, then legislation can be a response to dealing with the problem. And that's what was recognised in the positive duty, recognising that there needed to be a shift in onus from individual complainants onto prevention and elimination of those forms of behaviour. And in this case, it's recognising the responsibility of boards and directors to have to take more action, as well as the existing CEOs for who gets into the executive leadership team. And one of the things that I would also pick up on is if we look at how the Labor Party has really shifted with its gender targets, the representation of women in Parliament, and in very stark contrast to the Liberal Party, which did not have gender targets. And there's been many critiques, and there will continue to be critiques about some of the problems that the Liberal Party faces, but some of it is around representation of women and how it includes decision making within its ranks. So thinking about how to ensure that we do get the full diversity of our whole community, then it is having some of that accountability, and legislative responses is one of those ways.
How do we get past it being a box ticking exercise, though, even if it's in response to the legislation? Like, typically, people are perhaps driven by a higher purpose. We've had lots of thoughts on why this is obviously a no-brainer, but how do we get past that?
I mean, I don't know that you always do get past it. I think that what I've learned over many years of working in the social change space is that there are people who are persuaded by evidence, and then there are people who are ideologically attached to a belief. And that the people who can be persuaded by evidence are the people for whom this won't be a box-ticking exercise, and that they are the people who recognise the business benefits and the impact of having representative leadership, not just amongst men and women, but, people might want geographic representation or representation in other ways. I think and then there are other people for whom they don't agree with this. I think that if I've noticed anything about the backlash and pushback, I don't think anyone's ever has changed their position on whether they believe this is an important priority. What I think is that we've seen more social licence for people to be public about their strongly held views. In some ways, when people reveal what their beliefs are, it makes it easier to address it. What I observed, I've had a long career in this, and very early on I worked at the organisation that became the Workplace Gender Equality Agency. It was then called the Equal Opportunity for Women in the Workplace Agency, and my job was to implement the reporting framework of the legislation with employers who had employees of 100 people or more. And what I noticed is that it didn't matter in the beginning if it was box ticking, because what happens is even if you do it for the wrong reasons, over time you can shift the dial and make it the status quo, and then it becomes what people think about it doesn't matter, as long as the actions result in a shift, in some change. And I'll use one example. one of the employment matters that we were working on then was around how to create workplaces that were supportive of pregnancy, potential pregnancy and breastfeeding women. And I remember implementing that framework, and there were CEOs, there was one in particular who was running an ASX organisation who couldn't say the word lactation. And I metaphorically had to hold his hand and get him to say it. And you can't go into an ASX listed company now, or very few of them, where there aren't family rooms, where there's not universal parental leave. So I think I don't care how it starts, and it doesn't, for me, you can change hearts and minds, and ideally that would be wonderful. But as long as you put one step in front of the other, even if you've got people who are unwilling to do it, the only important thing is that even if they think it's box ticking, that they resource the mandate appropriately, because you can't do anything without, you need resources to create culture change, and that they build in accountability frameworks. Otherwise, the box tick will remain a box tick. And so I think that, and I think that there's an important role for all of us CEW members and people who are part of our CEW community to be vocal about what our expectations are of the organisations that we work within, the organisations that we might be shareholders of, the organisations that we support as consumers, and the organisations that we might interact in. I think that can also be very, very powerful. You can drag people along a journey, even if they don't believe in it, if they're under enough pressure.
Thank you. So in some ways you're saying the substance will eventually follow the form.
Well, it has in some areas, and I'm not saying that you'll ever convince. Listen, I've worked in the diversity space for a long time. Some people are fixed. They have fixed mindsets and they do not change their view. And it's ideological, and they're beyond reach because they're not motivated. Their motivations come from different things. And if what you're aspiring to is power and you like oppressing other people, and I view gender inequality as a form of oppression because you're not allowing people to fulfill their potential. If you're not motivated by those things, it's really hard to give people intrinsic motivation. And if you look at the personality profiles of some CEOs, they are not in that space where they have that openness and empathy for others. And so you need different levers. And so I think if we have a toolbox of many levers, and one of those levers is community pressure, it's the role of the media, the role of journalists, the role of regulatory bodies, the role of CEW in shining a light on this work, and the conversations that we have, that will go some. We cannot take our foot off the accelerator pedal.
I think you've touched on a pet topic of mine, where assessing for CEO succession, one of the key elements that we believe is critical is to be able to assess for that interpersonal awareness and empathy. Yeah. And that goes, it applies to both males and females, by the way. Men can also show those capabilities and capacities. Yeah. So
we're all humans, and we're all wired human.
And there can be women that also don't show it either as well. So you can have challenges on both sides. I have lots of questions for you, but if we take the analogy of having to hold the hand to say lactation, I think you talked about the new laws coming in, and actually it's going to be a requirement, and people are going to be held accountable for those things. But how do we help the organisations that perhaps aren't equipped or aren't, going to be able to know what to do, actually? I'm just wondering what you've seen. You look at ASX top 100 and other equities in Australia. What's been best practice that you may have observed in some of those organisations and engagements you've had?
Yeah, if you look at the results of the census, you see that the ASX 100 is the best performer, obviously, in the census, and then the ex-ASX 100 is kind of struggling. And we do, when we have engagement with the smaller companies, you know, they just have less resources. They have less people to know what the next requirements are. You know, some of them probably don't even know that next year they need to have 3 targets ready to go by May, and they'll be assessed on those for the next 3 years. These groups, when we talk to them and we say, oh, have you thought about targets, you know, for gender? They say, oh, look, we think that's nice, but we're on a growth path right now, and we've just got to hurry up. Like, you know, they don't have the ability to just sort of, you know, be more pensive and think about their strategy in the way that a big corporate can, and with all the, you know, the sort of bells and whistles that a big corporate has. So, you know, in a way, that's often where us as investors in this space can provide a role, because we're often saying to them things like, you know, did you know it's going to be mandatory for you to do a modern slavery report? Oh, we didn't know that, you know. And then they have to put one together. Thank goodness for ChatGPT now, it's going to get easier for these small companies to do this sort of thing. But, you know, I would say that, you know, we often sort of try and give those companies a little bit more leeway and sort of, you know, you need to be doing this and that and that. And it's actually, it's really hard. And, you know, they are struggling. So I think that's where, you know, trying to connect them to different organisations and people in the know is actually the best thing for them.
Interesting comment on ChatGPT, because I think there's some quite dangerous gender biases in terms of the programmers behind the scenes. So it is something we've got to actually watch out for and keep our critical thinking hats on. I made the comment that if we keep doing the same thing and expect a different result, that's insanity. Lisa, your thoughts around intersectionality in terms of, you know, are we measuring the right things? Is it still the most valuable thing for where we've come from and to, and where we're seeking to get to?
I mean, yeah, I think it's really important for us to recognise that women as a class we need to understand where we are and what our status is compared to men as a class. I mean, that's an important comparative assessment of where women, how we're tracking. But it's also really important to recognise that not all women have the same lived experience, and that, you know, whilst being a woman and you walk through life and there are things that women generally experience that maybe men don't, and they're at increased risk of, you know, being, you know, retiring poor and not having safety at work and being vulnerable in their own home. The experience for, if you're a First Nations woman, if you're a woman with a disability, if you're a woman who's been marginalised on the grounds of your race or your gender identity or you know, sexual orientation or even your social class, what we know from the data, and again Anna did some great work in the harassment space to have a look at that intersectional piece, is that your experience of discrimination exclusion is compounded by every marginalising factor. And so when we're looking for how to create solutions, what we know is that merit is distributed evenly within even the subgroups of being a woman, but the progress has not been felt evenly. So even though we have made progress in gender on some markers, what we know is that it's a narrow group of women who've experienced that the benefits of that progress, and I think it's really important that we understand that. So CEW is very interested in future censuses to be able to take an intersectional approach to understanding of the women who are part of this cohort, who are sitting in the pipeline or maybe in the executive leadership teams. What is, you know, how many of them are First Nations? How many of them have a lived experience of disability? I think these are really important things that will tell us the true status, because then you'll be able to unpack the real barriers. What we know is that women of colour don't experience sexual harassment, they experience racialised sexual harassment or gendered racism. And so you need to understand that intersection to create the solution. So I think we have to start in that space with data and information.
and the devil's in the details. Anything
Yeah.
you'd like to add, Anna? This is a deep area.
Yeah, so one of the things that I would add is that I'm not sure if any of you have seen the most recent Jobs and Skills Australia report, which looks at the gender pay gap, but it uses an intersectional approach. So it unpacks some of the occupations and how occupations are gender segregated, but also looking at the experience of First Nations workers and also culturally, racially marginalised workers. And it has particular insights which are different for each of those groups around which occupations, for example, First Nations women work in, which occupations culturally, racially marginalised workers work in. And so it provides more data, and then your decision making is only going to get better if you have good data and you can actually use that in shaping those decisions. And certainly one of the things that we did in the project, which we have just released some resources as well as a report, speaking from experience, was focusing on the experience of sexual harassment, workplace sexual harassment of women with disability, LGBTQI plus people, young people in particular, culturally, racially marginalised people, women in particular. And the experience that we heard was, as Lisa said, that it was never just gender. It was compounded by their other identity. So, and it was about vulnerability and power and the way power gets used in a workplace, and harassers are quite conscious of that. So, for example, if someone is on a temporary visa or is on a casual contract, then that makes them more vulnerable to sexual harassment. So some of our findings and recommendations were around things like people still not knowing what sexual harassment is. They confuse it with sexual assault, so the importance of actually having clear information about what is workplace sexual harassment. Also, that information, sometimes people hear it better from organisations that they relate to. So whether that be migrant refugee organisations or disability-based organisations. The importance of also having clear, concise, well-written policies and processes. So many people said, I went and spoke to Human Resources, People and Culture. They gave me a 50-page policy to read. And who's going to read that? I wouldn't read it, and I'm a lawyer, so so it does not help to help other people understand what their rights are if you actually have such a dense type of approach. Also, making harassers accountable, making it clear that there are consequences when someone is harassing other workers, and making sure though that the person who's been harassed is centred in how that process goes. What do they want to get out of any sort of complaint? And then the other thing that came out really strongly was around women feeling silenced if there is a use of a confidentiality agreement or a non-disclosure agreement, feeling pressured and feeling silenced, and that stops the accountability of organisations. So those were some of the things that we found through our Speaking from Experience project.
So awareness being a very critical starting point to change, isn't it?
Absolutely.
We're getting the wind up, I think. Maybe just one comment in terms of if we were to be actually a little bit bold here and try and have a different outcome. As I said, I'm hoping for 10 years next year that we might have a different message or a different outcome. What would be the one thing that you think can help move the needle? And just a short comment from each of you, please.
Oh, Sue, I can't do one thing because there's many things. When you're led by evidence, you know that there's so many different things. But I do think that, listen, I think targets with accountability, what Helen said, targets with accountability linked to remuneration is very powerful.
Thank you.
I'd go targets as well, gender targets, and I think we can use the WGEA approach around gender equality and absolutely linked to performance payment, bonuses, all of those things. And that's across the board, not just CEO, but the executive leadership.
Thank you.
I think just changing the leadership blueprint. You know, we know it's the CEO pathways that aren't getting females in there. And I always think of Gail Kelly. She started as a divisional head of HR, and someone believed in her and said, you can be head of the credit cards business. And she went, I don't know anything about credit cards. I've got no technology background. This is so out of my league. But they believed in her, they took a chance, and look where she went. So I just think we have to start looking at the heads of HR, the heads of legal, the heads of strategy, and start imagining them with P&L. We cannot just go the safe, no one gets fired for hiring Microsoft. We have to say, no, we're taking a risk with leadership, and we're going to put people who don't have all the box tickers, to make this, the right, easy, safe selection. We have to be bold.
Great, thank you. Maybe one from me. I sort of look out at the audience today, and it's a bit of an old chestnut, but I do wonder whether we are sort of speaking in an echo chamber, and in fact it's echoing. And I'm just wondering whether next year, can we, a simple request, can we each bring a man? Can we each find one influential man? Now that makes it slightly more difficult, but each of us undertake to bring a man so that we can have this conversation with a balance, actually. Because I do wonder whether we are. Is the message not being heard? I guess that's my question, and it's an old chestnut. But, and I'm gay, and I will bring a man, okay? Thank you, everyone.
I love that.
Thank you so much to our panel. What a conversation. I don't quite know how to sum up any of that, but I think we really ranged really far around the why of why it's important, not just for the economy and the business case of our corporates, but for society and culture. And I think sometimes we lose that conversation. So that was a really nice place to start. And then I think to hear about what are those legislative frameworks that have really changed the game and are going to be vital in terms of the positive duty, the WGEA Targets Bill. Australia is leading the world when it comes to these sort of legislative frameworks, but I think it's also about how do we implement them. So as CEW members, but also people as part of our community, there will be work that we're doing coming up with the Human Rights Commission, but also WGEA around the implementation of some of those legislative frameworks. So please feel free to get involved in those webinars and things that we have coming up. I think it was also really important that we explored the intersectional lens and the importance of greater intersectionality when it comes to our data, because that is really a focus that we've had in the census that we need to improve upon. So now I'd like to welcome Yana Kotatko to deliver a vote of thanks. Yana is the Group Executive for Telstra's retail and regional business, leading a team of over 5,000 people focused on customer experience. Since joining Telstra in 2017, she has held multiple leadership roles, including CEO of Belong, following extensive experience at NRMA, Vodafone and other telecommunications companies. Yana is known for her belief, which I think is very fitting given the conversation we've just had, that culture isn't just important, it's everything. So thank you again to Telstra, and please welcome Yana.
Well, that was fantastic. Thank you, panel. Sam, I'm also gay, and I will also bring a man next year. Lisa, Anna, Lucy and Sam, that was absolutely fantastic. I could have listened to that all night. You've really brought the findings of this year's CEW Census to life in a very vibrant, deeply personal and incredibly intelligent way. So thank you. Welcome. It's really lovely to host something like this, and Vicky gave us this space. She couldn't be here tonight, but Ian, where's Ian? Ian is a man also from Telstra. So on behalf of Ian, myself and the whole Telstra team, we hope you feel welcome and that we've provided some great hospitality for you tonight. I think it's important for us to be able to provide these beautiful spaces where we can have really bold and engaging conversations. So it's an absolute privilege and pleasure to host you all here tonight. I did want to mention the fabulous team, Carol Bertuccini. I don't know if she's in the room, but her and the CIC team put on an incredible show. This is a bit of a christening. We've just opened up the sort of 6 floors above us here. This is our new flexible working space. We used to take out the whole building pre-COVID, and now we're down to 6 floors. And being able to reopen this space and sort of share it with you all this evening's just been a real buzz. It's lovely to be back here. I've been at Telstra for about 9 years, and I've seen firsthand the power of really embracing diversity, equality and inclusion, not just as values, but something that's deeply connected with our strategy. And I've also had the pleasure and privilege of working with Vicky over the last 9 years and watching her ascendance into the CEO position via the CFO position. So maybe a more traditional pathway, but she is just an incredibly she's a brilliant role model, not just for women in leadership, but just for all leaders in our business. And we are one of those 26 ASX 300 companies who get to proudly say that we are women-led. I'm also very proud to see that we do also manage what we measure, and I think we've mentioned that tonight a few times. We're deeply committed to our 40-40-20 targets. They are public targets. They are embedded. I was really pleased to hear that metrics, and actually make it all about accountability. They are embedded in each of our executive leadership's scorecards. They're linked to REM. They're linked to bonuses. We take it very seriously. And having been at this business for a number of years, we like to hit a target. So I'm looking forward to us smashing that one out of the park out to 2030. My role here at Telstra, I run the retail business, 5,000, sort of a very vibrant workforce right across the country. And I was saying to Ian earlier over a drink, I feel incredibly lucky. I think I have one of the most diverse teams, if not the most diverse teams in all of Telstra, whether it be cultural diversity, language diversity, gender balance, and also a huge number of cultures. We hire a big proportion of our people are new to Australia, and so it's an incredibly privileged position to be in, that I get to create the environment where those people can do the best work of their lives. And I do believe that is my role, to create that environment for them. We've really embedded and embraced that flexible working. About a few years into my journey, I'd already had my kids. I've got 3 teenage boys that we're raising, which again, that's a whole nother story. But so I kind of missed out on all the paid parental leave, but was so pleased to see Telstra introduce that, well over 5 years ago now, and we see over 50% of paid parental leave being taken by males who are really keen to ensure that they're sharing the raising of children, and then opening up those possibilities for their partners. So that is something that's just, I've witnessed firsthand the difference that can make. Look, I'm going to wrap it up there, but I did want to thank everyone for being here tonight. I did want to thank, again, the CEW for your leadership on this important topic, and a special call out to Mel Fernandez, who has been on this journey for a couple of years now, for a number of years, and really taken it from being census to something that is a real platform for advocacy and a positive platform for change. So well done, Mel. I'm going to throw it back to you.
Thank you so much, Anna. And as we conclude, I think that was a really good moment to look at what good practice looks like and a model of accountability. I think what we've heard today is there is accountability gap in corporate Australia, but we all need to take action to make sure that we are driving that accountability in our spheres of influence. So the CEW Census calls you to 4 actions, which you probably know off by heart because I feel like people have said them a few times tonight, but just in case you don't, it's to set gender balance targets, 40-40 targets, to invest in a diverse leadership pipeline, to build safe, inclusive, respectful and flexible workplaces, and to challenge that leadership blueprint, how narrow that pipeline is at the moment. And I'm going to finish also with 3 other actions for you to take, which are a bit simpler than those kind of systemic change pieces. And the first is to really encourage you to come to the CEW Leadership Summit. On the 15th of October, we have our annual Leadership Summit that is happening down in Melbourne. It is titled Tomorrow Needs Everyone, and it is about leveraging gender equality and looking at the critical challenges that we face as a nation and how gender equality and gender balance conversations can solve some of these challenges. So we have topics such as AI gender bias and equality, gender equality and national economic resilience, women navigating the climate crisis, First Nations women's leadership, redefining Australia's sporting identity and practical strategies. And we've got an amazing lineup of speakers. Some of our headliners include Minister Katie Gallagher and Katrina Wallace. And we really look forward to seeing you there. We'd love to have you along. The second thing that I am going to encourage you to do is invest in the women in your leadership pipeline. CEW have a number of programs that are intentionally about investing in women leaders. So we have our scholarships and our leadership development programs. These are significant investments that are game changers for the women that take them. The CEW Leaders Program is a high impact investment in leadership potential. The program is a bespoke 6-day journey designed to prepare women leaders for executive leadership. Empowered women lead with impact, clarity and purpose, and I think we've heard a lot about that today. And the CEW Leaders Program is where that transformation begins. And we also offer our CEW Executive Leaders Program, which is a bespoke retreat for exceptional leaders in the C-suite and non-executive roles. So it amplifies their impact, their gravitas, their executive presence, and it also overcomes limiting perceptions. This experience empowers women to lead boldly, lift others, and make lasting impact. And we're running a webinar on the 25th of September. So if you want more information about those programs, please come along and join us. And the last action is, I think, a really simple one, but is only for CEW members. If you will have received our CEW membership survey that has been sent out to you, please go in and complete it. This will shape our strategy and the direction of the organisation going forward. So we'd really love to hear from all of you. So thank you again to our fabulous speakers. Thank you to our CEW Census sponsors, our thought leadership partner ANZ, and our venue host today, Telstra. And I'd also like to thank our other CEW partners as well, which you can see listed up here. And on that note, I'd also like to thank the CEW team. Events like this take a lot of work pulling together, and the team have worked tirelessly, not just on the census, but also on the event tonight. And I'd particularly like to call out, which I can't really see in the lights, but Brianna Delahunty, who is our Manager of Policy, who's over there, and Sarah Miller, who is our event manager, who is probably running around behind the scenes doing the incredible work that she does. So I'd love for everyone to give a round of applause to the CEW team. So thank you so much for your time this evening and being part of this important conversation. Helen spoke earlier about the moment in time, the poignant moment in time that we face as a nation, and this choice that we have of what kind of nation and corporate nation we are going to be. And so I call on everyone as we leave this room to make the choice to be part of that nation being one that leverages our full talent pool, unlocks the potential of women leaders, and builds a stronger, more resilient economy because of that. Thank you so much. We've got some more drinks for you.